We welcome you all to this panel discussion by eminent panelists. Today's topic is driving engines of India-US relations after the elections in India and USA. Before I hand over the floor to Ambassador Surinder Kumar, I would like to request you all to kindly switch off your phone or put it on silence mode. Ambassador Surinder Kumar, you have the floor to introduce the topic.
Thank you, Ajit. I hope General Deepak Kapoor will join soon. He is always on time. Well, as I have mentioned in my letter to all the panelists, you will have 10 minutes, and 10 minutes means 10 minutes. 8 minutes, you will have first buzzer, and then you get 2 minutes to finish. Now, मुझे भी 8 मिनट मिलेगा, आप बजा दीजिए, मैं चला जाऊँगा. To be able to finish, I am tempted to read rather than speak extempore. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome on this very warm evening. Thanks for coming in this scorching heat. My sincere thanks to all of our eminent panelists who have participated in IFA's earlier discussions also, some virtual and some physical. A word about the topic, driving engines. IFA was launched on 15th March 2010 in ITC Moria. And on 12th April 2010, less than 1 month after its birth, IFA had its first discussion not at the IIC or the Habitat Center, but a scope center, and the topic was driving engines of India-US relations. Interestingly, one of the panelists of that first discussion is very much amidst us this evening. His name is Gurcharan Das. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a big hand. He has released his 2 books, which we are doing very well. At that function, we also had Ms. Ujra Jaya, Minister Political from American Embassy, who is currently Under Secretary of State in the Biden administration. We also used to have DCM Don Lu, who participated in more than 6 discussions, and he is Assistant Secretary for Asian region. Since the visit of President Clinton in March 2000, India-US relations have been transformed beyond recognition, notwithstanding change of guard and change of government in Washington and Delhi, underlining a bipartisan national consensus for better relations. We are a major defense partner, a special global strategic partner, and are working closely in the Quad, the Indo-Pacific, G20, I2, U2, IMEC, and cooperating on many issues. At an event recently, EM Dr. S. Jaishankar stressed that India-US relationship is still growing and evolving. Given their history and position and the domination in the global affairs, the US is used to certain types of response. And given our history and our situation, we see things from our perspective which might be at times different from theirs. We aren't allies, so we can't follow any hierarchy in our dealing. The good thing is that when we are not agreeing, we discuss openly and explain our region, and they understand and appreciate our decision. 2 instances stand out. Initial reaction to India's decision to buy the Russian oil was very negative. India was accused to be on the wrong side of history. But later they understood India's argument and came around saying that Indian purchase of Russian oil has, in fact, helped stabilize international price of oil. Last week, a relatively junior spokesperson of the White House said after India-Iran had signed an agreement about Chabahar port that any country dealing with Iran should be aware that its action can attract sanctions. India explained how Chabahar port will help the entire region, especially Afghanistan and Central Asian Republic. The US understood our argument, and their objections have not gone but have receded. In fact, John Kirby, White House advisor on national security, was all praises for India last week. He said, the India-US relationship has strengthened under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in particularly during the last 3 years of Biden administration. Our relationship with India is extremely close and getting closer. He added, you saw it on a state visit. We launched all kinds of new initiatives, working on critical emerging technologies together in bolstering and expanding the relevance of Indo-Pacific, Quad, of course, which India is a part of. And then just the people-to-people exchanges, a military that we share with India. It's a very vibrant, very active partnership. We are grateful for Prime Minister Modi's leadership. I don't think India has received such fulsome praise from the US very often. I won't like to preempt what our distinguished panelists are going to say, but let me just scratch the surface. The US is India's largest trading partner, though I read an article last night saying China has regained this position. Largest investor, the largest source of higher technology. There are roughly 30 government-to-government missions which cover areas from monsoon prediction and agriculture to vaccine space. The MOU signed during Prime Minister's state visit last year for GE to transfer 80% of technology to co-produce with HAL GE F414 jet engines will go down as a milestone in India's relation, and ISET may be the game changer. Though there is no TFA inside, the trade and defense, oil and gas will continue to expand given our requirements. While many world leaders might be concerned, worried about outcome of forthcoming US elections November this year, we are in an enviable situation because of the personal chemistry, bonhomie, and warmth which Prime Minister Modi has enjoyed with both the presidential candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Besides, given our credentials, most populated nation, largest democracy, fastest growing economy, huge market, bright prospect under ISET, defense and security cooperation, strategic conversations and global commons, and presence of rich, educated, influential 4.1 million Indian Americans in USA, make it imperative for any US president to strive to have the best of relations with India, especially when faced with lengthening shadows of Chinese dragon. We couldn't find a more eminent panel headed by Amb.Ronen Sen, who has served as ambassador to Mexico, Russian Federation, Germany, USA, High Commissioner to UK, and a special envoy on various occasions. He has served not one, not two, but 5 prime ministers and PMO, but he has never run around like a headless chicken. Amb.Meera Shankar has also served as JSPMO and has been ambassador to Germany and USA. She is a very popular, familiar face on the prime-time TV debates. General Deepak Kapoor, who is not here, I hope he joins, is the former Chief Army Staff who has been honored with several medals and was chairman of the Chiefs Staff Committee. He's a veteran of the Bangladesh War and served in the Northeast and at the LAC and was involved in containing militancy in J&K. Gurcharan Das, though once he loomed large as the CEO of Procter & Gamble India and MD of Procter & Gamble Worldwide, he listened to the voice of inner heart and became full-time author, and has several best-selling books to his credit: India Unbound, Difficulty of Being Good, and his most 2 recent books, Another Short of Freedom and The Dilemma of Indian Liberal, now prefers to be talked about and taken as a thought guru. Sri T.K. Arun, after serving resident editor of the Economic Times, he has turned to full-time writing with vengeance, churning out more than half a dozen articles every month, subject from economy to politics to internal affairs. For detailed biography sketches of the panelists, please glance through the pages of the brochure. I'm sure you will have an interesting and informative and meaningful discussion. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Now, my second head, I will request my friend T.K. Arun to initiate the discussion, and he will tell us, as one president said, the economy is stupid, how economic relations are going to direct influence India-US relations. Over to you.
Distinguished members of the podium, members of the audience, I am likely the person to be least specialized on the subject on which I am going to speak. So kindly bear with me. I do not think the individual personal identities of the leaders of the 2 countries will have much of a bearing on how relations between the 2 countries will evolve in the coming years. India's current Prime Minister actually interfered in the last US presidential elections by declaring, "Abki baar, abki sarkar, Trump sarkar." That didn't actually prevent Biden from developing warm relations with India or with the Indian Prime Minister. So I don't think that really comes into the picture. The overriding concern for the US, as far as India is concerned, is China. India, a strong India, is the bulwark against unpeaceful China. For China's rise to be peaceful, India needs to be strong. It was because of the realization that Bush decided to proceed with the Indo-US nuclear deal. And this logic has continued during the subsequent presidencies after Trump. And I am sure that is what will guide the US administration the years to come also. In economic matters, actually things proceed. India is a very large market, both for software services and goods. But we set a target for achieving $500 billion trade in 2012, formalized in 2014. Today, 10 years later, it is around $200 billion. There is a long way to go. This will continue. But the main consideration I would like to present before you might be one of conflict. There are a couple of areas where India needs to confront the US, and which we haven't been doing. Both relate to climate change directly and indirectly. 2,400 gigatons of carbon dioxide is what has been released into the atmosphere since 1850. Unless a good portion is taken out, there is no way you can prevent global temperatures rising 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times. This is the simple reality. However much additional emissions you reduce, however much you ask countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America to forego their development by compromising energy use, you cannot prevent this warming unless carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. But this is not really a major part of the agenda for anybody. It is not part of the agenda on global climate discussions. It's all reducing additional emissions reduction targets. Green energy is good, but green energy is very expensive. I don't think people appreciate when they read that the cost of solar power has come down to less than 2 rupees a unit, that this is actually nonsense. To integrate 1 unit of solar power into the grid, you need to back down regular thermal power to the same capacity to maintain the grid stability. When you back down regular power, you need to pay the capacity charge for that power. It's only the fuel cost that is avoided. You continue to pay that plant the entire cost of being available to you. So that cost must be added to each unit of solar power that you consume. You need additional investment in the grid to keep the grid stable. So while solar energy, wind energy, etc. are good, they are expensive. And that cost is actually underappreciated. Carbon dioxide removal from the air for the first time under Biden's Infrastructure Reduction Act is getting some attention. The largest project to remove carbon dioxide is being undertaken by an oil company in the US claiming subsidy from the Biden administration. It is removing 1 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. But that is hardly a drop in the ocean. 2,400 gigatons has been deposited. It must be removed. Now, luckily, there are technologies where this carbon dioxide removal leads to use. There is a company called LanzaTech, which has developed bacteria which will absorb carbon dioxide from the air and convert it into ethylene. This ethylene is being used for creating polyester. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this brand, Lululemon. They sell athleisure, yoga pants. Lululemon actually uses polyester made from LanzaTech's bacteria for manufacturing yoga pants. So this is one way of using atmospheric carbon dioxide, removing it from the air, and converting it into productive use. There are many such technologies need to be developed. And this must be a major area of focus, which unfortunately it is not. Second is, the WTO today stands dismantled effectively because the dispute settlement mechanism has been torpedoed by Trump. You refuse to appoint people onto the the appellate authority, and therefore you cannot resolve disputes. Today it doesn't have the quorum. The appellate body doesn't have a quorum to resolve disputes, and so nobody can approach the appellate authority. So Biden is unilaterally taking punitive measures against China rather than going to the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. And it is forcing Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers to turn their output to developing countries like India. India has a policy, thanks to Tesla, where we'll allow EVs to be imported in India at a very low tariff, if they offer to make some commitment of investment down the line. But many countries in Africa and Latin America will import these cars and they'll be running them. Have we ever seriously done a calculation as to how much of additional mining of cobalt, nickel, cadmium, manganese, aluminum, and copper would be required for the entire fleet of cars in the world to be replaced by electric cars? Will this create greater environmental damage, greater energy demand, a greater burden on the planet than conventional cars? So is storage battery cars the solution to our environmental crisis we are facing? There is an alternative. There are the fuel cell cars. Fuel cells produce electricity and directly run the car. The fuel cells are produced and they are on board the car. They are fueled by hydrogen, liquid hydrogen. So that is another technology, which is the one that is likely to place a lower burden. So unless this is decided, if developing countries like India buy electric vehicles and later the world decides actually fuel cell cars are better and we should stop making and supplying storage battery run electric cars, you'll have a huge standard assets. Huge amount of money will be wasted. These cars will not be supported. You won't get replacement batteries. You'll have the charging infrastructure going waste. Can developing countries afford this? You need to have global rules on this. And the US, which is supposed to be the main champion of rules-based world order, is itself breaking rules. So who will set the rules? So India will have to take the initiative to set the rules on these kind of issues. Even though this means we have to confront the US government. And this is some of the areas where India will have to be proactive when global leadership is actually faltering. Thank you.
Thank you, Arunji, for advising India to be proactive. I hope some people are listening. Now I turn to my friend Gurcharan Das. He will decide whether you want to highlight or flag the China angle on India-US relations or something else. Up to you.
Yes, as T.K. Arun has just told us, the elephant in the room in the subject on America and India is China. Originally, I had thought of speaking on the liberals' dilemma in both India and America, because that was something on my mind, having just completed a book on the subject. But on reflection, it seemed self-indulgent. Surendra Kumar reminded me just before this that, liberals are a dying species, so it's the wrong subject. Anyway, so instead, I shall follow Arun's example and look at the US-India relationship under the lens of China. It is obvious,
I think, to all of us that our first imperative is to live in harmony with China. Our close relationship to America makes China, however, wary of us. China would like us to be more neutral, but it is clearly in our national interest to have America behind us. China's economy is today 5 times bigger than ours, and it will take a full generation to bridge that gap. Until then, we need America. Washington too has arrived at the same reasonable conclusion. The only country in Asia big enough to counterbalance China is India. Despite the many differences between us and America, such as Ukraine, relations between America and India have never been closer. India will never become an outright ally of the US like UK or Japan, because this will clearly reduce our strategic autonomy. Still, it's not difficult to see our tilt towards Washington becoming a complicating factor in the Sino-India relationship. Will American seduction strengthen or weaken our objective? Objective being to live in harmony with China. Well, in a sense, having good relationships with both India and China makes India a resource in the China-India rivalry, resource to mediate, resource to have back-channel relationships. Also, clearly we are moving in a new era in human history with the rise of Asia. In the 1960s, not a single Asian economy was in the top 5. Today, 3 out of the top 5 economies are Asian. In the 1960s, Europe's share of global GDP was 30%. Today, it's 20%. By 2050, it will be 10%. As Western domination recedes, the rest of the world is looking for a new leader to lead our world. And of course, the West has gifted our world with a benevolent world order after World War II, led by America, and this has enabled the rise of Asia. Today, though, neither America nor Europe has the appetite to take on the mantle of global leadership. China wants it, but the world is suspicious of a world ruled by China. Besides, China is bogged down by its conflict with the US. With America and China paralyzed, the only candidate in the long run would be India. It is trusted by most countries in the world. In the emerging multipolar world, India can also serve as a truly independent pole and provide political cover to many states who want to stay out of the US-China geopolitical context. The UK and Japan can't provide an independent pole as they are American allies, but India can. India can, and if it has strong, friendly ties with both US and China. This is another reason for India to maintain a harmonious relationship with China. Whoever wins on June 3rd, I hope there will be rethinking on rejoining RCEP. Studies have shown that the Indian economy would become stronger and better off if we joined RCEP with 15 other countries of Asia Pacific. A 2020 study by the Peterson Institute predicted that India's income would increase by 60 billion annually if it joins this agreement. Another 2023 study also found that India's predicted exports to RCEP as a group would be higher than its predicted imports. The authors of that study wrote that India's overall export potential appears to be much higher compared to imports in the case of China, Australia, and New Zealand, as China exports to India have already crossed their potential level. The chance of further increase is comparatively small and unsustainable. It is true that a flood of more competitive imports would lead to some Schumpeterian creative destruction in the Indian economy. Some non-competitive industries will die, but such creative destruction is needed to build a resilient economy for the future. This is one of the reasons American economy remains the most dynamic in the world. So, if sensible studies show that India would benefit from joining RCEP, why doesn't India join? The simple answer is China. Our suspicion of China and fear of a surge of Chinese imports presents a rational decision. A harmonious relationship would enable India to join RCEP without fear. And of course, the big obstacle, however, in the way of Indo-China relationship, in the Indian-Chinese relationship, is our border dispute. Can America help to settle it? The reason why our relationship today is bad because of the tragic incident in Galwan in 2020. Several Chinese-Indian soldiers died in the clash. Until that clash, there were regular bilateral meetings between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi. The border issue won't be resolved because the two countries' positions are incompatible. Both sides will admit that that's an obvious solution. It was proposed twice by China, by Premier Zhu to Mr. Nehru in the early 1960s and by Deng Xiaoping to Rajiv Gandhi in the 1980s. The Chinese proposed that India retain the region now known as Arunachal Pradesh, while China retains Aksai Chin. In other words, status quo. Chinese leaders believe that Arunachal Pradesh will never be ceded to China by India, and Indian leaders believe that Aksai Chin will never be ceded by China to India. Yet, for domestic political reasons, the dispute carries on. Making territorial decisions is difficult. It takes exceptionally strong leadership. If Prime Minister Modi wins the current election in a big way, and if she remains in power, an opportunity may well emerge for a grand strategic bargain on Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. whoever gets elected on June 3rd in Delhi and later in the year in America, I hope they will bear some of these thoughts in mind. The best foreign policy for India is labor-intensive 7% economic growth. Only thus will India close the gap with China. Only thus will it be able to become strong with an equal negotiating strength with China. Thank you.
Thank you, Gurcharan. You have flagged so many issues which can be debated. I wish I had some China expert here. But let me tell you, just having harmonious relations with China is easier said than done. And then Chinese and American economies are not paralyzed. China has some problem, but I don't think American economy is paralyzed. I think technology is going to be the next frontier of progress, and I think American innovation and new technologies are still far ahead of others. Then joining RCEP, there's a lot of political debate inside the government, outside the government. I don't think there's any inclination to join. Things might have changed. Then talk about Arunachal Pradesh and some offer of resolution in the past. I think we have gone far ahead. The developments have overtaken. Jaye Shankar has very clearly stated so many times, unless you really have the border, peace, tranquility returned, you can't have the normal relations, business as usual. So I think we will have some more discussion on this. And India, China having harmonious relations, how much Prime Minister Modi has done. He had gone to what you call the informal summit in Wuhan, and then you have Chennai, and you have a Sabarmati Front and the ashram of Sabarmati, all those things, but we have to go by how the reality stand. The Americans can help, but certainly can't help in mediation, but they have been helping. I'm told they did help in some satellite images on the LSE, and I think the ambassador who went last time, Ken Juster, said he can't tell publicly, but Indians know how we help them, and we know how they help them. So there are so many issues. Thank you very much for flagging. Now I have used it. General Kapoor will not make it. He met an accident on the way, so he will not be coming. So I will request Meera, in your comment, you can also add this defense aspect. Please go ahead.
I hope you will give me some more time there.
I've already given you 5 minutes of General Kapoor. And those remaining 5 minutes to go to members of the
Okay. Ambassador Surinder Kumar, Ambassador Ronen Sen, and distinguished members on the panel, and all those who are listening. I've been asked to talk on, whether the initiative on critical and emerging technologies could be a transformational initiative in the relationship, and now, of course, also to touch on defense. Firstly, I would say that there is a geopolitical context to the closer ties and the strategic partnership that India and the US have been able to establish in recent years. And that is the dilemma of how to balance a rising China whose behavior has been increasingly assertive, even aggressive, in the Indo-Pacific region. And this has brought the two countries together. Mind you, neither of the countries is seeking conflict with China. Sometimes people think that this is kind of now entering a conflictual relationship with China. I think neither India nor the US is seeking a conflict with China, but we are seeking to create a more sustainable balance in Asia, which would not be under the dominance of any one country, and also would therefore be conducive to peace and stability and economic prosperity in the region. Of course, there are also divergences that we have with the US. We've seen that with regard to Ukraine, but also because we are a developing country, and we would like to keep options open to develop in a number of fields. We may not see eye to eye with the US, which is a developed economy with huge asymmetries with India. This is just to give the broad context. One other factor which we should take into account in the geopolitical context at the moment is really geo-economic. And that is post-COVID, countries are looking to de-risk from China. They're not delinking because they have found that decoupling or delinking from China would be very difficult, but they do seek to de-risk, to look at alternative supply chains which would ensure that if there is a crisis, there are no gaps in supply, as we saw during COVID, of critical medical equipment, of technologies, of masks, of everything. So this provides an opportunity to India and the US to really look at how they can elevate their strategic technological partnership. And the initiative on critical and emerging technologies is basically designed with this in mind. It looks at creating an ecosystem between governments, businesses, research institutions, and universities to expand the strategic, technological, and defense industrial cooperation partnership with India. Now, this is an initiative which was launched or at least announced by the two leaders, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, in 2022 on the sidelines of their meeting in Tokyo. And then the first meeting was launched in January 23. It focuses specifically on certain key areas of emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum technologies, including quantum computing, advanced wireless communication systems, and space. These are the 5 key areas of focus for the two countries, and they have said that they will look at advanced materials and biotechnology in a subsequent phase. It's a fairly ambitious initiative, but it's also quite amorphous. So it has the possibility of either being very successful and transforming the relationship into new areas and building a very viable technological partnership, or it can go the way of all flesh. You know, it could just end up being a lot of rhetoric without the ability to concretize specific projects. Now, in each of these sectors, there are specific things that the two countries have agreed to do. For instance, if we take semiconductors, the US has agreed to support the creation of a design, manufacturing, and fabrication ecosystem in India. And the two countries have also agreed to help in terms of creating the trained or developing the trained manpower to support this system. Has there been anything concrete? Yes, some incipient investment. I think Micron, US company Micron, is investing $875 million. And then there will be additional 50% investment from Government of India, 20% from Government of Gujarat. So a total of $2.7 billion in this project for advanced testing and packaging of semiconductor chips. So it's not going to be for actually manufacturing the chips. It is for the final encasement of the chip and testing it before it is finally packaged. Then you have other companies, US companies, who have announced investment in creating an R&D center here, and also setting in place training facilities for developing trained manpower for the semiconductor ecosystem that we hope to build in India. The US has also said that it will work with India. They will try to connect the business systems of the two countries and the research institutions of the two countries to see if India can be brought in, how India can be brought in to global supply chains. So some progress has been made, but a lot more needs to be done to actualize the vision of the two countries working together to create this semiconductor ecosystem. Again, we look at the area of space, which has been an area of ongoing cooperation between India and the US. Here, the US has committed to try to put an Indian astronaut on the International Space Station by 2024. I don't know if that will be realized, but certainly what they have agreed to do is to provide training for Indian astronauts in international space flight at NASA. So that training is certainly going to be very much a part of the space initiative. Then, of course, the two countries are looking at how they can, cooperate further in the commercial aspects of space, including lunar flights, because India has opened its space sector to the private sector, and there is a considerable potential for the two countries to work together, especially since India's space exploration has been the most cost-effective, much cheaper than the similar flights in other countries. So NASA and ISRO are going to work together to explore how they can expand cooperation, and their businesses are going to also network to see how this could be expanded. Similarly, the Department of Space in India and NASA are going to work together to see how they could expand cooperation. So again, very ambitious targets and the desire to have an ambitious goal, but the devil is going to be in implementing specific programs and projects and actually enabling this to get off the ground. In 5G technologies, 5G, 6G technologies, wireless, advanced wireless communications, again, the two countries hope to work together, both on regulatory frameworks and on technologies, and also on open RAM systems. So it's a broad agenda where companies, I suppose, like Qualcomm, which are in wireless and local loop technologies, would hope to find a market as far as the US is concerned. And India would like to have more secure telecommunication technology collaboration partners, having ruled out Huawei from our 5G technology processes. So again, an area with considerable potential, but you have to work at actually establishing the concrete projects, concrete proposals, concrete funding, if government funding has to be there. Finally, you have quantum computing. Here we have agreed to set up a network of universities and institutions on quantum computing. And the US has also agreed to work with their Congress to reduce barriers to technology exports of high quantum computing computers and systems to India. Finally, artificial intelligence is one of the sectors, very important upcoming sector, where again we are going to network universities and institutions and also have programs with joint funding under the India-US Science Foundation. So, as I said, it has the promise of actually transforming the relationship in frontier technologies, just as after the 91 reforms, it was the link-up of Indian companies with US IT and technology companies and the US market, which enabled the takeoff of the IT and software sectors in India, which became key drivers of the Indian economy. And at that stage, I know we were looking at exports of 1 to 2 billion. It was 400 million. And today, it's in hundreds of billions that we are exporting. So that is the kind of quantum leap we have been able to take economically within India as a result of the linkage with the US economy. And even today, the trade with the US, $200 billion in goods and services, is important for India because it's our largest export market. We talk of China being the largest exporter of goods, but 18% of India's total exports go to the US, and we have a trade surplus of $45 billion. With China, our trade in goods is $118 billion, and the surplus that China has with us is something like $85 billion and growing, Gurcharan, every year. So I don't know when it's going to stop. As you say, it will peter out, but at the moment it doesn't look good. And the impact that it has had in India is that it eviscerated our small and medium industries at a time when they were not prepared for global competition, and therefore it has hit employment generation in India very, very substantially. And when we talk of RCEP, basically I think very few people realize we already have a free trade agreement with ASEAN. And we are now looking at reviewing it, seeing how we can make it more substantial. We already have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Japan and South Korea. We are negotiating an agreement with Australia and perhaps with New Zealand. So it would really just leave China out. So we don't really suffer as a result of being out of RCEP, whereas the kind of trade deficits you have with China in RCEP and no duties, I think would leave you very, very vulnerable because your manufacturing sector is not globally competitive except in the field of pharmaceuticals and automobiles. Now, to come to defense, we've been able to make considerable strides in the defense sector. As Surinder said, we have signed a range of agreements from logistics to communications compatibility and security to basic exchange of geospatial data to an industrial security annex, which now provide a framework for taking defense cooperation to the next level. We, from a position where we didn't import anything from the US, we are importing about $25 billion worth of defense equipment from the US. And we have begun to make some progress on defense industrial cooperation. That was really the weak spot where we had failed to make progress. And now with this GE F414 engine deal with HAL, which will power the Tejas Mark II aircraft, we are in a position to see that there will be something, substantial in this field. We have set up now under the ISET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. It is to prepare a new roadmap for defense industrial cooperation, and there's also a Defense Industrial Cooperation Accelerator Program, which the two countries have put in place. So depending on how smoothly the deal between GE and HAL is implemented, how much of technology is finally transferred, and whether this is like a first step Or is it going to be the harbinger of a broader defense industrial cooperation relationship? We have to see. And this is one area where I do worry that Mr. Trump will not be very helpful, because his whole program has been reshoring back to America. Why do we do anything with other countries outside? So the trade front and the defense industrial cooperation front could suffer under a Trump presidency. Thank you.
Thank you, Meera. If Trump is listening, I'm sure you won't get visa during his presidency. You've touched many interesting aspects of collaboration and promising frontier technologies and NASA and ISRO and others. And as you said, there are very ambitious plans, and how they are implemented, that we'll see. Now we turn to Ambassador Arun Sen. He needs no introduction. He has been dealing with USA for a long, long time. He knows so many people. And floor is yours, sir. You can choose to talk about anything of interest about India-US relations.
Thank you. I won't choose to talk on anything. I'll talk on what you told me to talk about. But I'll deviate occasionally. One is his Ambassador Surinder Singh's advice to me was that I should talk about whether this India-US relations has been propelled more by personal chemistry between two leaders, that is the Indian PM and the US President, or propelled by fears and concerns about China, and which of these have been the main driver. My own view, I'll just jotted down some notes to stick to the time, because we can't go on endlessly. And much of the ground has already been covered by previous speakers. In fact, most of it. I will give my personal view in view of my own experience. And I'm completely out of date in this respect compared to any of the previous speakers. And my view is that ultimately core national interests, as perceived at any given time, prevail over ideology or personal predilections or the outlook of leaders. Not just in India-US relations, but that India-China, Indo-Russian, or all major relationships. And how we are perceived also is, to use a now common word which is not commonly used, how we are perceived is not in how we perceive ourselves, but how others perceive us in terms of the role that we play, which will be judged by comprehensive national power, not by intentions. Never has. Because all through, we have seen, whatever we might call it, earlier we called it by different names, non-aligned, developing, today we call it Global South. Earlier we said we have independent, non-alignment means independence of judgment and action. Today we call it, what is it?
Multi-alignment.
Multi-alignment. We call it by all different names, but basically how are they different? You don't say the developing countries, you say Global South to distinguish it from what? Global North? But anyway, so I won't get into those definitional aspects. But briefly, I will say, and also in terms of the US, I've been personally associated with both the lowest points and the biggest transformation into the most broad-based and strategic partnership. So, from both perspectives, one was the lowest point was Indo-Soviet treaty, when I was special assistant to one of the movers at that time, the main mover, that's D.P. Dhar, who was our ambassador in Moscow. And also, in terms of after the nuclear test, you had the Non-Proliferation Act, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, President Carter, and then with a number of prime ministers I'd worked with at that time when I was a lowly post of Deputy Secretary, but I also happened to be the Secretary to the Atomic Energy Commission. So all major policy papers for the cabinet for Morarji Desai to Indira Gandhi. And so at that time, and that was the lowest point of time, which resulted in India being singled out, sanctioned, and a sort of what we called at that time, and now it's been common usage, nuclear apartheid. The unilateral abrogation of Tarapur Agreement and so on and so forth. Now that was transformed, and to what extent was it transformed? Because both establishments in the United States and India made a calculated sort of, a checklist, see how we can get it all together. Yes, there was some preparation, but none of the establishments in both countries ever expected it to happen as quickly and in the manner that it did. There, the personal approach of Dr. Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister, and President Bush made a lot of this possible, bringing this agreement together. It faltered a number of times, number of places. It was written off, or it was, conclusions were drawn before it was actually, we settled all the contentious issues. But in this, without Bush, it won't have happened. And what is it which motivated Bush? Bush was motivated primarily by his concern, whether it was whatever way it was perceived, of democracy and human rights, active promotion of democracy. None of the predecessors did it, and even now it is a policy which is criticized. Even regime change to bring about democracy. Actions, the endless wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on and so forth. Now, and that was understood, not just by Dr. Manmohan Singh, it was understood by Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. It didn't happen during Clinton. Clinton was partially because of Pakistan and Kargil, where he took a very positive stand. But basically it was Atal Bihari Vajpayee and the way he took the first pioneering measure of the NSSP, that is the next steps in strategic partnership. And then the nuclear agreement, which was not contemplated at that time. It was thought that it will take, at least a decade more. But it was all sort of compressed. And that became possible, and they recognized it. How did they recognize it? I'll give you, it's just a manifestation. I don't want to go into details of talks. But it was recognized when you had the conference of, Concert of Democracies. Warsaw, and Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh went for that. No other South Asian country, the only other South Asian country was basically who took an active role was the Republic of Korea. And then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Bush inaugurating jointly in the presence of all global leaders, these two jointly inaugurated the UN Democracy Fund. And we became the second largest contributor to that fund, which is not a small fund. You're talking in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars. Today, we still continue with that, but we are not the second largest, we are the fourth largest. That recognition was there, and that is essentially what gave a tremendous impetus to the relationship. Otherwise, without their personal intervention, of both, one went to the extent of staking the future of the government on the deal. It has not happened before on any agreement anywhere. The second was on Bush in the extraordinary commitments, because let me be clear on one thing, it wouldn't have happened. For instance, we knew from President Obama directly, he had mentioned that to me, and from his advisors before and after, that it wouldn't be taken up by his administration, and certainly not with any other administration. Also, having these, there have been some mention on, let's say, China. China, I think, is a very, very important player. And let me, on one thing, say that whether a package deal, whether we accept it or not, without a package deal, you will have no agreement. That means you decide to be the only country, major country, with an unresolved boundary. That's it, simple. And I'm saying it right now. I've said it earlier, and I repeat it. Without a package deal, there will be no such agreement. It is give and take. And that principle we had recognized during the visit of Rajiv Gandhi to China. That is mutual agreement, mutual, what's it? MUMA. Adjustment was added by that time Foreign Minister Narasimha Rao. So that one was accepted. We went back on it. Very simple. Another aspect was that it was taken further, saying that it was recognized that Asia was going to be the engine of global growth at that time, 1988. What was not recognized, but it was stated specifically that without India and China cooperating, the 21st century will never be an Asian century. It went, but that's where the departure took place. That in that year, in 1988, in December 88, we were equal to China in terms of GDP growth and a number of other aspects. Today, it's not there. And with 7% growth, it's not going to be possible. Unless you presume that China, even if you presume that China is going to grow at 2.5%, simple power of compounding, you have to grow at double digits, and we have done it earlier. So let's answer to that is, if you want to bridge the gap, let's say we become decent, let's say half the size of China. You're talking even at 10% growth for a pretty long time. So that's number one. Environment, I agree completely. A very important issue, much more dangerous and immediate than the nuclear holocaust. That's facing us. The time is ticking. And there's no prospect of that happening under Biden, or certainly not Trump, who's a climate denier. On trade, we have talked about WTO and so on and so forth. Basically, as a dispute resolution, India and the USA have been the biggest spoilers, historically. At every meeting since the inception of the Uruguay round, our brief to our delegations in the green room was use the principle of consensus to block consensus. And we had, apart from the United States, the maximum recourse to dispute settlement, the maximum number, anywhere in the world. So this is just some basic issue. We have to get it together. If we don't want to join the RCEP, ultimately, we don't want to join any WTO plurilateral, which won't happen anyway, on any issue. On investment, nobody in the world today, nowhere, east, west, north, south, has any takers for the BTI, our model. So we can decide ultimately what we want to do, but the windows are closing every day. While you take a decision, the windows are closing. And on new technologies and renewables, I fully agree with what Mr. Arun has stated. It won't come about unless with significant funds. And I had some exposure to private industry, in fact, throughout, during the nuclear deal, the first time we involved Indian industry directly, not as a fait accompli or being just a part of the process, but very directly in helping us to take the decisions. And I've been also involved somehow or the other in some institutions which are promoting or building science technology in all the areas which have been mentioned. Honestly, our efforts, we have not been able to do what we had done earlier, let's say, during when we got Cray supercomputer, and we denied it. Because that time we were producing a parallel processing computer, which was as good. So till we get to that stage, that what do you bring to the table, we are not going to be able to proceed, and let's be clear, with the level of investment, whether it's in the private sector or government or universities, we are nowhere on the scene. So I don't want to be a pessimist, but as long as we recognize our own capabilities, a pathway to bridging these gaps, just by rhetoric, you are not going to change the reality. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Taking us on the nostalgic trip, what happened 10, 15, 20 years back, and also touching upon the phases of India and China relations. It's very complicated, a lot of water has flown, and I think what China did after 40 years of peace was disturbed. I think now we are totally different phase, and after elections, the government of the day will decide how to proceed and how to implement. Now you all have heard, please give a big hand to our panelists. And there's a lot of thought-provoking ideas emerging. I think many of you are expert here, and we can have a decent question-answer session. But be very brief, not comments. I will prefer that you really ask sharp and brief questions. So let us see who want to ask. Yes, our friend Ambassador Rajiv Kumar Bhatia, who is also Distinguished Fellow of the Gateway House, write very extensively in ASEAN and Indo-Pacific and Quad.
Thank you very much. Just two small questions. If India-US relations are so important, how do the two former ambassadors sitting here look at the long gap that we face in naming our ambassador in Washington? No, but this is an obvious question. I mean, you are holding a very right event, and yet there is no ambassador there for a long time. I mean, how do we explain? And my second question is, sir, particularly to Mr. Sen, where does Russia fit into this India, US, China triangle? Thank you very much.
You might get a call tonight, Rajiv. They are wanting to have a new ambassador. Okay, Meera, you can start, the other can chip in. And then Ambassador Ronen Sen spent a lot of years in Russia, so you can.
So, firstly, obviously, we should have an ambassador in Washington. It's not desirable to have long gaps. As it is on the US side, there are long gaps because of their confirmation process. You know, when they nominate an ambassador, he has to be confirmed by the Senate. And since the Senate has generally been with the opposition, many cases, it takes months, you know, and sometimes even years for their ambassador's nomination to be confirmed. So it is certainly not desirable to have our missions in Delhi or in Washington be without an ambassador. Your access gets affected, your effectiveness gets affected, your ability to drive even vis-a-vis your own governments gets affected. So certainly I would hope that sooner than later India announces an ambassador. Now, of course, we are in the midst of the election fray, so after the new government is in place, I do hope that an ambassador is announced very soon.
Already selected.
As far as Russia is concerned, I will leave the mic to Ronen.
Well, only one on appointment of ambassadors. It's not just for India to announce, it is for the receiving country to accept it. It's called, I mean, we all know that. And after that, there is an announcement. Not that it makes a big difference, because I have the dubious distinction of being the only Indian to not take over as ambassador to China after my, everything was approved. It was approved, it was announced, and after all farewells, just on 2 days before my departure for Beijing, I was told to stay back in Moscow. And talking about that, in Russia, I've been there. In fact, I don't think there's been I don't think there has been no Indian diplomat who has served longer in Moscow. And during all transitions, right from Brezhnev to Gorbachev and Yeltsin. And Putin was just about taking over when I left in '98. So there I would say that, the question you have asked is vitally important, because what has been the biggest change in our security environment in the last decade and a half, let's say, that has been the strengthening of Russia-China relations to an extent which has not been witnessed in Russia's existence. That is, when I talk about Russian existence, you're talking of 1 millennium. Never ever, during any period of time, has the relationship been closer. I'm not saying there are no problems. There are lots of potential problems. I don't want to go into details, but they exist. But this is a fact. And even if you take what they state in public, it is in a way, it is the number one relationship. Let's say in the foreign policy paper or the doctrine as laid out, as spelled out in 2000, let's say the latest one was a couple of years back. It's number one. And that has gone to the state in terms of the economic integration and many other developments which cannot be reversed. Even if you take a decision to reverse, it's going to take couple of decades to reverse. And that kind of reversal, I don't see that happening in the current atmosphere, in the current environment. So we'll have to live with that for some time. And that is an important relationship, even if you take it from a very narrow perspective, in terms of our defense requirements, for instance. You take the number of platforms. If you want to replace those platforms, you're talking in terms of, even if you double your defense budget, double it, or even let's say triple it, you're talking of a process of minimum 1 decade, minimum. And I'm saying minimum because you might get it, but it will not be integrated into your system. Because it's not just procurement which is important, you have to integrate it. So that is the stake. And today and that has been affected in the Ukraine war. So I don't want to go into all the details. I could go into individual platforms. There are lots of issues. And so it is something which has affected us to an extent which no other development has affected us that directly as this. And the rest of it, of course, without going into other details, and deliberately so, because some aspects I don't want to get into, and also the fact is, when you talked about the US, for instance, and China, I don't see any prospect of the USA intervening in a Sino-Indian conflict on the land border.
Okay.
I think Rajiv's question was the Russia factor in India-US relations. I think obviously the Ukraine conflict has made it more difficult for India to navigate its relationship with these two countries. But while the US and the West would have been happier if India had taken the same approach as them, I think both countries have avoided their differences over the relationship that India has with Russia, and which it has maintained even after the war in Ukraine. Both countries have been able to avoid this becoming a point of rupture in their relationship. And this is something different to the past. I think the Indian side has been able to explain the rationale for its relationship with Russia and the fact that we have good reasons. We don't want to push Russia completely into China's basket, which is what has happened as a result of US sanctions and Western sanctions, and the delinkage of the energy supply from Russia to Western Europe. China has become the natural outlet for gas, and of course now India is also buying oil from Russia. So Russia will move towards the Asian market, both China and India, in terms of its energy. Secondly, we have also been able to explain that over 60% of our defense equipment today is of Russian origin. And while we have been diversifying our sources of supply, today Russian exports account for 47% of India's defense imports. It's still something which is not going to happen dramatically, and which will be over a period of time. Plus, we want the autonomy to be able to source not just from the US and the West, but also from other countries, wherever we get the best deal. So I think both countries have been able to avoid this becoming a point of rupture in the relationship. I think Europe has followed the US lead, though Europeans are a little more emotional about this.
Okay, I had mentioned in my introductory remarks itself that how we have been reaching that kind of maturity. When differences are there, we try to make them understand. You, sir, please. If you can please identify yourself.
My name is Deepak Kapoor. I
He is
teach in
former Vice Chancellor of Delhi University and he is one of the advisor of IFA.
It has been very useful to hear the people who have so much experience in foreign affairs. I think our biggest enemy is our own complacency. We spend only 0.65% of our GDP on science and technology. This is not enough to even get hold of the nuances of the new technologies that are being developed. United States is not going to spoon feed us. Have we prepared a generation of scientists who can absorb these technologies, who can make use of these technologies? China sent so many people into US. Japan did it earlier during Meiji Revolution, but we have never thought of it. So I think all these high tech, nobody is going to spoon feed. AI is based on data. We have a bad tradition of not collecting proper data. So we will not be able to use our own data for AI tomorrow. So I think our complacency in these matters is too much, and we are not positioning ourselves in manufacturing still. And as far as the global warming is concerned, I think India should look very seriously at nuclear, and we should collaborate with Japan and United States and get the best of the technologies that are available with them and improvise over them. But you have to create a class of scientists and engineers, which we are not interested in doing. It is really regretful that India spends only 0.65% of its GDP on science and technology. So I think I have only bad news.
Thank you, Dr. Pentel, for your very valuable comments.
I think
now I must also, just 1 minute, US embassy is claiming they gave 1 million visas last year, 1 year. And we have the largest number of students in USA. And I'm sure many of them are really doing, I think most of the business schools in USA are headed by the Indian origin deans. And so many, you have valid point, we must spend much more R&D, much more other areas, certainly. But I will, because there are so many people who want to ask questions, I will, the person who want to make comment later, I think there are gentlemen there.
My name is Ratnesh Singh, and I just want to...
Your question will be answered by my friend Gurcharan Das in advance.
One area which is where no one has spoken about today is what role would Iran play in India-US relations?
Yes, it does. Gurcharan.
No, I'm afraid I'm not equipped to answer that question.
Okay, TK Arunji, Iran. After trade matter, after all, when USA asked us last year, don't buy oil, we stopped buying it. And then, but at the same time, we have been having our own relationship with Iran, which is different, and Americans certainly will not agree, but we have not abandoned. Meera, you want to tell?
I just would like to say one thing. While I am not an expert on this, the distance between Delhi and Mumbai is greater than the distance between Mumbai and Chowbahar. We have had close civilizational ties with Iran. It is unfortunate that Iran fell to a bunch of mullahs and stopped the democratization of the Islamic world. But that doesn't mean that this node of civilization is insignificant for the world and for the development of global civilization. It still plays a very important role in the region, and in terms of exercising power, as we can very well see, it is important that India maintain a decent relationship with Iran. And we are trying to do that. We are trying to finesse the stance we take with the US with the positions we take with Iran. And we'll need to maintain this balancing act till Iran sheds its rule by clergy, which we hope will happen. And I don't think that is impossible. But if Iran maintains its strategic ambivalence on nuclear weapon capability, I'm sure it will continue to retain a level of strategic influence over the entire region, including on the US and on India. And nobody can dispute that. Thank you.
Okay, Meera, quickly.
Just a small addition to what TK Arun has said, and that is that, US policy has also seen ups and downs on Iran. If you've seen under the Obama administration, the nuclear deal with Iran was negotiated, which involved both Europe as well as Russia and China. So all the great powers were party to that agreement. And at that stage, there was pressure that the nuclear deal should not be completed in isolation, but Iran's regional policies and missile policy should also be brought into the negotiating framework. But that proved too difficult, and the Obama administration believed that delaying or preventing Iran's nuclear program, weapons program, was too important to link it to a larger basket of negotiations. Now, as part of the deal, the sanctions on Iran were to be lifted, but the US Congress would not agree to lifting of the sanctions. And at that stage, the US was telling us, invest in Iran, go ahead quickly, because the Iranian regime should feel the benefits flowing from the nuclear agreement, go ahead quickly with Chabahar, etc. When President Trump came to power, he withdrew from the nuclear deal and imposed additional sanctions on Iran. And then there was this question, what will happen to our Chabahar project, which is important for India, which was very important for Afghanistan at that stage, to have an alternative, route to the coast, rather than be completely dependent on Pakistan, and which was very important for India to access Afghanistan, since Pakistan does not provide us transit rights, but beyond Pakistan to also access Central Asia. So we went ahead with that project, and even the Trump administration agreed to a carve-out for the Chabahar project, given its strategic importance for Afghanistan and for India, and it did not impose sanctions on us under their domestic laws. I hope that we are able to, handle again this issue with a degree of maturity and keeping, India's strategic interests in mind.
Thank you. Extend by 5 minutes, 3 questions, 3 answers, 5 minutes. Sesadri Chari, Ura Bagai, and Dr. Rao. 3 persons, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Brief question, please.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Seshadri, a former ambassador. A remark about trade. In fact, one aspect that I see, a very positive one, during the Biden administration, is a kind of consensus that both sides have been able to arrive at in terms of solving 7 disputes that were pending, trade disputes, and also accommodating each other's interests in terms of specific products or services, which is something very unusual, and that's never happened before in terms of trade relationship. That is a good beginning. But the question is, will this get sustained should a Trump administration come in? In fact, maybe it will be really on our part, the onus, to persuade, should that happen, for the same understanding to continue between both sides on trade issues, which is it's been a very good beginning. That is the comment I would make.
Very briefly, Meera.
Sheshadri, I think that under Trump, both sides had been discussing a broader trade understanding, and they had almost reached agreement, and at the last minute it fell through. Yes, the Biden administration has been far more accommodating, far more consensual on major trade issues. President Trump had tightened the H-1B visas, making it far more difficult for our software professionals to go to the US in pursuit of trade. There were duties imposed on steel and aluminum products, and after 2 years we imposed reciprocal duties on an equivalent amount. There was withdrawal of GSP, and then there was the withdrawal of developing country status. You know, there were a number of unilateral trade actions which the Trump administration took. But at the end, they were also discussing a broader trade agreement. So which actually encompassed not the whole of trade, because nobody in the US will touch a free trade agreement, but substantive elements of trade on both sides. So I do hope that we will be able to pick up the threads. And the good thing is that we have resolved 7 disputes, as you said. So the fewer disputes there are to resolve, the less likely that there is to be trade friction of the kind we saw in the first trade administration, Trump administration.
Okay, Mr. Bagay, your questions will be related to the subject of the day.
Yes, Mr. Gurcharan Das has pointed out that we need a harmonious relationship between us and China and the US. But I think we should take into account that so far the Chinese have not had any armed conflict with anyone other than water cannons, which were recently talked about. Even Galwan,
Near the mic, please.
Even Galwan was not an armed incident. Now, the American military industrial complex would love nothing better than to somehow infuse an armed conflict so that they could send their arms again, because their economy improves that way. So
this is your comment?
No, should we not therefore be careful about getting too close to the US defense military complex? And secondly, I just wanted to point out that we have a nuanced approach so that we don't hurt anyone. Point is that both in the case of Israel as well as in the case of Ukraine, there have been enormous amount of destruction, and our nuanced approach has not yielded anything at all. So I think that is very unfortunate. Thank you.
Ukraine and Israel some other time. We are not discussing that today. Dr. Rao, please.
Yeah, I'll make a very quick comment. So far as the Sino-Indian relations are concerned, then there are no niceties. The predatory hegemony and the debt trap diplomacy is well known. And we have seen them in Arunachal, renaming our parts of Arunachal, giving stapled visas. We've also seen the huge build-up on our borders. We've also seen they're trying to invest in India, 1% in HDFC when we started a different policy. Therefore, any regime anywhere in the world which opposes China is a friend of India. And we should hope that we have in the US elections, someone who will be more in control of what China is doing in this region.
Thank you. Do you know how many countries in the world China is the largest trading partner?
Never mind.
Anyway.
Never mind.
Thank you very much for coming.
It can all end in a minute. We've seen that happen in Iran.
Thank you, dear panelists. You all have done wonderful job in this heat. The place is cooler here.